Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Best Words. Last week, we had a brief discussion about Governor Cuomo. This week, we're joined with co-founder of the Sexual Harassment Working Group, Erica Vladimer, to continue that discussion. Erica, how you doing today?
I'm good, Gabe. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, longtime listeners of the show will not be even a little bit surprised that you're our first guest in the video format. When I always held you as something of a moral center to me, and here's why. During the
Thanks.
kind of during the peak Cuomo mania, during the height of his popularity during COVID, I found myself being sucked into the appeal. I found myself emotionally feeling warm feelings to him that intellectually I knew better. But every time I communicated with you, I was really taken away by your clarity that you had about this man and who he really was.
Yeah, I think that right there shows how much control this power abuser had over our state, right? He is a master manipulator. And part of that comes from his experience being in government before he was governor, being a close advisor to his father, Mario Cuomo. But also it shows because he is so obsessed with the public spotlight, how adept he is at being able to manipulate his public persona versus what he's actually doing as the executive, the actual steps he's taking as someone who is governing a very large state with over 19 million people, and how well he can hide that.
So, as co founder of the Sexual Harassment Working Group, you are no stranger to taking down dirtbags in Albany. So, why don't you give us a tiny bit of background there and then how it applies to today's situation?
Sure. So the Sexual Harassment Working Group was co-founded by seven former New York State legislative employees. All of us had experienced either sexual harassment, assault, abuse, or retaliation at the hands of state elected or appointed officials. We came together in early 2018 when we saw in our individual capacities that the governor was trying to roll out this women's agenda, right? He was saying that he was going to pass the strongest sexual harassment protections in the country as a response to the reignition of the Me Too movement and it going viral after so many women came forward against Harvey Weinstein. We all like to call ourselves policy wonks, sometimes policy bitches, if you will. And so we were reading this legislation on our own and recognized that not only would it have not helped us in our specific situations, but it was actually going to be very dangerous. And there was certainly an aspect to what he was looking to pass that would have put workers in even more danger, and made it harder for victims and survivors to come forward and get the justice they deserve. We put out a public statement in late March of 2018, just basically saying, slow your roll. It's clear this is not going to be helpful. It doesn't have to be done during the budget process. This should be discussed publicly and in a much longer format through something like public hearings. And they still passed it in the budget of the 2019 budget in April, like April 1st of 2018. And so we sort of took that as a challenge accepted kind of thing, where if they were not going to do the work that's necessary to protect workers, we were going to show them how it's done. We ended up publishing a white paper in partnership with other experts and advocates, including employment attorneys. We successfully secured two joint legislative public hearings on sexual harassment in the workplace, the first of their kind in nearly 30 years here in New York State. And then in June of 2019, we got some major legislation passed that really reflected more of what is and should be acceptable in the workplace, and making it easier for victims of harassment and discrimination to seek justice. Um, Clearly, the work is not over, right? There were some incredibly important things that fell off the table during the negotiations in 2019. And this example that I'm going to go into sort of ties, or more or less ties into exactly what we're looking at today with Cuomo. Um, Half of elected and appointed officials are not considered employees. They are considered personal staff. We call this the license to harass loophole, and it exists because of Title VII on the federal level, the Civil Rights Act. And it basically says if you work for an elected or appointed official, and based on what your duties might be for them, you are actually not an employee, you are personal staff to them. What does this mean in practice? Basically, the state of New York has used this loophole to argue in different lawsuits of harassment and discrimination to say they are not an employer of a staffer. We saw this with former Assembly member Dennis Gaberzak, who had sexually harassed and abused about 7 former staffers. And one of his staffers who sued, laid out in detail in her complaint all of the responsibilities that she had as a staffer. The court said that as a result of these responsibilities, it's very clear that she is a personal staffer and she is not a state employee, and dismissed the case against the state. Other judges, other courts have looked at the question and decided differently, but the fact that it's so in flux makes it so that workers are not as protected when they're in public service. And this is not just for state level staffers. We're also thinking about city level here in New York City, staffers who work for city council members, in any county legislature, right? Nassau County, Suffolk County. All of those staffers right now are not as protected as workers in the private industry. And Governor Cuomo knew this. He signed the law in 2019 to protect staffers more, and knew that they were leaving out government staffers. So the day that he signed these laws, these stronger laws in 2019, the following day he woke up and then decided he was going to sexually harass a state trooper. That's why the work of the working group really is not done. We have a lot more to do for public servants, and also just to help survivors in general. There's a lot more to do for workers who are in private industry.
That's wild. I don't think most people know that public staffers of elected officials are not protected under sexual harassment laws to the same degree
Hmm.
that people in the private sector are.
Well, that
That's a
sounds a
really
lot like the Uber and Lyft kind of like independent contractor thing. It's very similar in that way. I mean, obviously not the same, but
No, absolutely. And, there were some pieces of the bills that were passed in 2019 to strengthen protections for independent contractors. A lot of it is also on the end of that independent contractors can be held liable, or a company can be held liable for the actions of an independent contractor. But this is, again, also a state level. And when you look at something like Uber, there is a brilliant woman, Allison Turkos, who has talked about her story publicly about being kidnapped and gang raped using, a car service. It was Lyft. But because of the terms and services that we all agree to by using something like Uber, like Lyft, it really bars the opportunity to get that justice as well. And a huge part of it is also the criminal aspect, right? Sometimes it's, there's Marissa Hochstetter, who works on Reform the Sex Crimes Unit. And the working group does a lot of work with Marissa and Allison to try and bring victims who are looking to go through the criminal justice system to find justice. But we focus a lot more on the civil aspect, because so much of what we see in the workplace doesn't rise to the criminal level. And when that doesn't happen, when the civil laws are so unclear, and don't protect everybody on an equitable plane, it allows workplaces to become, as the independent investigators said in their report of Cuomo's executive chamber, a toxic environment filled with bullying and abuse and intimidation.
so. This week, the legislature has sort of declined to impeach Cuomo. How do you feel that they're handling their responsibility in the middle of this scandal?
They are not handling it. Full stop. This is on the Assembly at the moment. Similar to what we see on the congressional level, the Assembly, which sort of operates like the House of Representatives, has the authority and, frankly, the responsibility to conduct an impeachment investigation, go through an entire impeachment process, and decide whether or not they are going to put through articles of impeachment. And this is done through the Assembly's Judiciary Committee. What we saw last week is that because Governor Cuomo put in his 2 weeks notice, the Speaker of the Assembly has unilaterally decided that that means that they do not have the constitutional authority to impeach him. And he relies on an incredibly flimsy memo of law that we don't know who wrote it. We don't know if it was the independent a law firm that the Assembly hired to help the Judiciary Committee through its impeachment inquiry. And I'm actually going to put inquiry in quotes because, and we can get to that in a little bit, but it really wasn't part of the impeachment process. But we don't know if it was that law firm that wrote this memo saying that there is no jurisdiction to impeach, or if it was inside Assembly Council. But no matter who it was poorly written. It relies on bullshit precedents as well. And the fact that it starts with a flawed question of whether they can impeach a resigned governor shows how little thought went into this and what a political decision it really was. Continuing to affirm and confirm what we've known about the Assembly all along, which is that they do not stand up for survivors. They have not done that since 2001, when another co-founder of the working group, Elizabeth Crothers, came forward to tell then Speaker Shelley Silver that she was raped by his counsel, Michael Boxley. He said to her that his first priority is to protect the institution. And it is very clear that Speaker Hastie is carrying on that tradition to not only protect the institution of the state assembly, but also the institution of the executive branch.
So are there any heroes in this story? Like Tish James, how has she comported herself in her office?
I would say that she brought us to as close of an independent process as we could possibly get. When the governor was first accused, after Lindsey Boylan came out and then Charlotte Bennett came out with her story, the governor put out a statement basically saying that he wanted to have an independent investigation, and he was going to hire an outside firm. Independent. Within hours, he reframed it, and I think it was his counsel, Beth Garvey, who put something out and said the chief judge is going to help conduct an investigation. That in of itself is also not independent, considering Cuomo appointed the chief judge. The actual process that is within, statute, within law, says that the governor must refer investigations to the attorney general. And so while we knew all along, most of us who were watching, that it should have been in the attorney general's jurisdiction, it was really up to the governor to refer it. And he finally did refer an investigation without the authority to bring criminal charges. I do want to caveat that. And what the attorney general did then was hire outside independent counsel, and she deputized them. It wasn't just any counsel. I do think that, it's important to show that there's a difference between the counsel that the attorney general hired and the counsel that the assembly hired to help conduct their impeachment inquiry. The independent investigators that Tish James hired were Ann Clark and June Kim. Ann Clark has a lot of experience in harassment and discrimination cases in the workplace. And June Kim, we know, has a lot of experience in investigating corruption in government. And those are the kinds of expertise that you need, not only to just look through documents and papers, but to actually have the necessary conversations, the depositions, taking the testimony, of victims, making sure that they're coming at this in a way that's not going to be as significantly re-traumatizing, that we know this type of process can be for workers who come forward that experienced harassment and discrimination. So I would say the Attorney General, really did a fantastic job. She did not comment on it at all, as the governor and his administration tried to make it look like a political process and a political hit job, quickly dismissing through her spokespeople that that's not what this is, and not really going further in her comments on that. And then, when standing up at that press conference, God, was that 2 weeks ago now? Time is really a flat circle, and I don't know when that's going to change. But standing there, she said she believed the women. And I think she had every right to put that opinion out there because it reaffirmed what the independent investigator said. But before that, she really conducted herself with the utmost respect. And I'm very grateful to her for that.
The legislature appears to still be afraid of this man. Now, you said something on Twitter the other day along the lines of no one's actually seen the resignation letter. So what would be the significance of that? And what do you see as Cuomo's future in the state? Do you think he thinks he's permanently done in the governor's mansion?
He does not think that he's permanently done. I am going to extend that to say he doesn't think he's permanently done in the governor's mansion. There was a New Yorker article over the weekend where he had his first interview. Laura Namias was one of the bylines on there, and forgive me, I don't remember who she wrote it with. But Laura's amazing and brilliant, and the article itself is brilliantly framed. There's a quote from Cuomo in there that basically says that not going away, that he has an opinion and people value his opinion, and he's going to remain involved. And that is deeply concerning, and he is allowed to do that because he was not impeached. I continue to beat this drum on the fact that we haven't seen a resignation letter, because in New York State, the law says that you can even rescind a resignation letter until the very minute that it goes into effect. And Cuomo gave himself 2 weeks. He has not actually resigned. He said he intends to resign. And if there's anything we know about Cuomo, is that nothing is too crazy for him to do. So who's to say that he might not come back, right, on the day before that he is supposed to resign and say, I was talking it over with my attorneys, and because they chose not to move forward with impeachment, there was clearly nothing there. And so I don't need to leave. I think it's important for me to finish my term, right? And I promise not to run again, whatever it might be. Some people think I'm a little crazy for thinking that way. I think those people have not been paying enough attention to Cuomo and what he will do to maintain his position of power. And let's say he does resign, right? We did see yesterday that he basically filed for his pension to start on September 1st. Which is sort of a good sign. But he still's got $18 million in his own campaign account. And he can use that for campaign activities, which is a very broad definition. So public rehabilitation and polling, and, brand saving, trying to save his own Governor Cuomo brand, all of that can fall under campaign activities. And so we can see a world where he comes back and tries to run for governor in 2022, or maybe 2026, whatever it might be. I don't think he is done with public service, and that is deeply concerning.
Yeah, I mean, the legislature appears to, again, still be afraid of him. And if he really was on his way out the door, I think that dynamic would have changed. So it's a fascinating take. And the more I look into it, the more I would not be surprised if it unfolds the way you said.
Yeah, and it's interesting you said the legislature is afraid of him, and I do think that there are skeletons in the closet of the assembly and certain assembly members that exist that Cuomo knows about. We know from some leaked audio of conference among the assembly Dems that Speaker Hasty said something along the lines of, any one of us could be next. And I don't think he said that hypothetically. So I do think that there is this fear, right? Cuomo has also said during a press conference that, there's a lot that Jacob can dig up on legislators. I think he was specifically referencing someone like Senator Alessandra Biaggi, but he still has plenty of control over the Joint Commission on Public Ethics until he's out of office. And we've got, it's a little bit less than a week now, but it's still, close to a week of him being in office. I don't think it's just fear. I think it shows that the power abuse, and this is what the working group has talked a lot about, is not just siloed in one chamber, be it the executive chamber, and it's also not siloed in one individual. This is not a bad apples thing that we are looking at here. It's not just Governor Cuomo. It's not just the executive chamber. This type of power abuse, especially over staffers, really seeps into the state legislature as well, and seeps into the leadership in the legislature. And so I think it's also about self-preservation and protection, and not necessarily all about fear of Cuomo. That is definitely a big part of it, but also it's a fear of accountability.
Yeah, I mean, Albany is 2 hours and 60 years away. You get off that train, and the culture is. So you're thinking that the widespread practice of sexual harassment among any number of legislators gives Cuomo something of a shield.
Absolutely, it gives the entire institution a shield, and this is why we look at this at an institutional level. We can get rid of Cuomo, and yes, that is incredibly important. It is very important to hold power abusers as individuals accountable. Cuomo was allowed to abuse his power, to amass even more power, because the system is designed to protect power abusers. The system has been designed by power abusers to protect themselves and their fellow power abusers. And that's why it's important to look at systemic reform, looking at things like closing the license to harass loophole, looking at things like holding public hearings on what it would mean to create a truly independent ethics accountability oversight body. And making sure that we're addressing this on a constitutional level, on a statutory level, on a public policy level, and also on a cultural level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Erica, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. You know that I'm going to be talking about this all the time, even when Cuomo's out of office. So just let me know when you want me back to rant a little more.
Okay. Well, if Cuomo doesn't resign, we'll have you right back on.
Yes. Well, I'm gonna, I'll put that on like Monday at 11:59, because that's technically his last minute in office. So we'll have to see what happens on Tuesday at 12 a.m.